Three, two, one. All right. So we should be live. Let me check our feed. We are in fact live.
Ooh.
All right.
Hooray. It's interesting because I can see Natalie on the live feed, but I can't see her in our thing.
The internet is being picky.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, I'm just gonna make sure our media board is on live. Okay. Let's just hop into it. If I can find the intro. Here we go. If it wants to play.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time. I'm your host today, Chris Brando. Today, we're going to be talking about maintenance. Once again, this is episode 3, I think it is, in this maintenance miniseries we're doing. And today, we're talking about not maintaining our code, not building or buying, but instead maintaining ourselves and our lives. I'm joined today by my co-panelist, Natalie Pistonovich. How are you doing today,
Hello.
Natalie?
I'm better than my internet. Thank you for asking.
Well, that is a good thing. And Natalie and I are joined today by Ian Lopshire. How are you doing today, Ian?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here.
Amazing. All right, then. So, as I said, we're going to be talking about maintaining our lives today, and more importantly, maintaining balance within our lives. And to start off, I have an interesting question I wanted to pose to my two panelists here. How many weeks do you think are in the average human life? Ian, why don't you take a guess first?
Well, about 50 weeks in a year, about 80 years in a life, so like 4,000.
Why are you doing
4,000
math?
weeks.
Human math? All right. Ian says 4,000. What do you say, Natalie?
I agree with Ian. I think there's that article by Wait But Why that they count that, and they also show which part of that you spend with your parents until you're 18, and then you leave the house. And I think that one left a strong impression of me that this is so little. But yeah, I agree that this is roughly a similar number, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, if you live about 80 years.
You're both right. You know, it's roughly around, it's a little over 4,000 weeks. Which is a astonishingly short amount of time, considering, you know, we spend, 20 of that if you go to college in school. So that, you know, knocks you down to like 60 years total. So it's not a large amount of time that we have to work with over the course of our lives. And a lot of that time, you know, we do spend at work, you know, trying to balance the, you know, going to work for 8 hours for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for most of us. If you happen to work at a startup, that might be more like 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, or something crazy like that. So yeah, the scene for this episode is like, you know, how do we spend those 4,000 weeks as effectively as possible and in a way that makes us, you know, as happy as possible. So to start off, let's talk about work and balancing work, not necessarily work in life, but just work. And I'll start with this. You know, I think I brought it up in episodes before, but a lot of the terminology we use in software engineering is all about like speed or like intensity, right? We have sprints, we have velocity, we have agile. And I want to pose this question to you, my two wonderful panelists. What do you think of the framing of these words that we use? Do you think that they're a bit too intense? Do you think that they give the right amount of kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Right amount of intensity, I guess, whatever, to how we should feel about the work we're doing and the speed at which we need to achieve things. Ian,
Yeah, happy to weigh in. So I do think like sprint specifically is one that kind of gets me. Sprint just kind of gives this idea of I'm going to do something as fast as I can and then be done, but then we do it every week. Just the idea, just the word itself just brings to mind like an unmaintainable pace.
I was trying to remember what is the word that we were using in my first job. My first job was in hardware. It was at Intel. It was not agile and it was not a startup by all means. I could not manage to remember that word, but there is something. Obviously, I don't know how I feel about that word because it's a decade and I don't remember it. So obviously, I didn't feel strongly about that positively or negatively. But the second job that I had afterwards, / the first one in software, I was not doing any of the agile stuff. It was not sprints, nothing like that, no planning as well. There was a daily stand-up, and I think I really enjoyed that. And then going to the one afterwards, that's how I got introduced to those terms. I did like this less. So I like exactly, Ian, like you say, this like rush. Let's try to make this in time and let's measure things like velocity, right? Velocity versus speed is back to physics classes that where you're going somewhere in a specific speed, but also you're going with a direction, right? That's like vectors versus, how do you say it in English? Scalars? The opposite of a vector?
Scalars, yeah.
Scalar.
Yeah.
Yeah, why does velocity have a direction? Why is it not speed?
I mean, I would guess
we're the product managers to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, where's Angelica? Angelica, where are you? Yeah, I mean, I would take an assumption to say that probably, we want a direction for where we're going as quickly as we're going, so we kind of, aren't just, working against ourselves, right? Because we're just optimizing for speed. We could be driving in a circle. We could be one sprint going in one way and another sprint turning completely around and going back to where we came from. And obviously, if we just do that, we're not actually going anywhere, even if we are moving quickly. So I guess for that one, I would say, there's this nice idea of like velocity. At least we're aiming at something. We're trying to get somewhere. But is that something that we should be measuring on a sprint by sprint basis? Or does, the velocity that is the word velocity that, we all just kind of defined between ourselves as like, the speed at which we're heading towards something in a direction, is that the reality of what velocity is in our sprints and in the practice of software engineering we do? That's a very meta question. Wow. I don't know. What do you think, Ian? Do you think that what we just kind of framed velocity as lines up with the velocity that we experience when we actually build software? Or when we measure our speed of build software?
I think we try to make it line up like that. To me, velocity is something that, everyone's trying to measure and no one's doing a good job at it. Or maybe I've never been somewhere where we've done a good job at it. Yeah. I don't know. I actually did not quite follow that whole question that you just asked, but
yeah. So I mean, I guess I can kind of repeat it, or I guess rephrase it to be. Yeah, I'll rephrase it. So basically, in the conversation we just had, we basically said, Natalie brought up this interesting point about, velocity in physics being like speed in a specific direction. And she asked, why did we measure this directionality instead of just the speed at which we're moving? To which I kind of added to and tried to answer a question by saying, because we want to make sure that we're going in a direction that is positive for us, right? We have a goal, we have something that we're trying to build, something that we're trying to do. So that could be why we use the term velocity instead of just trying to measure speed. And the question I asked you was, does that actually match, right? When we say velocity, when we measure velocity over the course of a number of sprints, is that actually tracking the way in which the direction in which our software is going, or is it tracking something else and we're just using the word velocity because it sounds cool?
I mean, I think it's the latter. I think we probably use that because it sounds better than speed, or they already use speed for something else. I've never seen like a mechanism that says like, hey, did this ticket go backwards in any way? You know, like, did I just spend 2 hours ripping something out that I spent 3 hours working on previously? So I do think it's pretty much synonymous with speed.
That's a really interesting point, the ripping out part, right? Like when you see a GitHub pull request that is more red than green, somehow we're all more appreciative of this because somehow surely it makes the code better because it's less of it. And this is in some way kind of going back. I wonder really what is, if there's any logic behind velocity, what is the logic that this is measuring?
I also think that's an interesting point too, because there is this trend that we have of like saying like make your code more deletable and we should delete code, or we should, ideally I think at one point, we're trying to get to the like don't write the code in the first place. But yeah, on the deleting code point, I think that really is interesting, because it's like, yeah, we all strive to make code that's deletable, but what's that really saying? Like we wrote something, is that deletable code something that we should have had there in the first place, or did we just write something that we shouldn't have when we made a mistake? And are we doing anything to track those mistakes to try and make sure that in the future we just write less code overall instead of writing code that's deletable?
A little bit like when you move to a new place and you go to IKEA and quickly buy something until you get real furniture. It's kind of like this code is there until I put real code there.
Yeah, but I feel like that's what we just continually do, right? We just like continually buy more like foldable like tables and chairs, and we get like slightly nicer versions of those tables and chairs. And I guess I wonder. Go ahead.
Yeah, refactor pretty much like I want finding a nicer one, but I have more IKEA than I'm willing to admit at home. I do think that the one day that I'll decide to make it a more less IKEA flat and more flat would be not one by one, but kind of one day I'll bring in a home designer and she'll make everything beautiful, but it will not be one by one. But in software, it's sort of like piece by piece, like element by element. Why is it different?
Right. Yeah, I think I guess I would pose sorry, my brain's just like computing at the moment.
All the shopping list. I really need the new shelf.
Oh, these shelves. But like I guess it's that point, I think that's like a really, really good point there, because we do have this very like iterative, don't do big design up front, do it piece by piece. But I think your apartment analogy is like spot on. I know for me personally, like in the last apartment I lived in, I did take this more piecemeal approach, right? I did just buy a bunch of IKEA stuff, and I'm like, I need a bookshelf, so I just like bought a bookshelf. I needed this thing, so I just bought this like I need some nightstands, so I just bought some nightstands, right? Just like piece by piece. Like every time I needed a little thing, I just bought a little thing. But my apartment never really like, it didn't feel like it had a good flow to it. It felt that it was just kind of like assembled piecemeal, and things were just kind of patched together. And when I moved into my current apartment, I decided, no, I'm just going to plan everything. I'm going to plan where I want everything, how I want everything, and figure out all of the pieces. And I did that for the first iteration of my apartment. I sat down, I planned everything out. I bought the things, I got the things, I put them up. And then I've added to it since, but all those things I added to are in the same, feel. They're in the same balance with everything else in my apartment. So it looks like those things were put there right from the beginning. But the only reason I could do that is because I planned up front, right? I said, this is the aesthetic I want for my apartment. This is how I want things to look. This is how I want things to feel. And I feel like a lot of times in Agile, we don't do that, right? It's like we hate to plan. We try and get away from planning. We try to get away from the big upfront design, as it says. So yeah, I think that's I think that's just what I want to say about it. I don't think I have a question based off of that.
It's also a little bit like, I'll just get this temporary thing that my neighbor gave me this nightstand, and then it's like 5 years in, this is your nightstand. It's not temporary. And in software, it's pretty much the same. Just quickly gonna patch out whatever is needed, and then it's like 5 years later, oh, maybe I can remove that. Finally, it happens. Yeah, it does kind of feel that if you have time and you're not rushed to move in, then you can plan and then it will look nice. But if you don't, you just go whatever off the shelf is, and then probably the same as an IKEA feels, probably an IKEA code would feel like this. How would you describe like the equivalent feeling of code into an apartment?
I mean, I feel like it's like I feel like what we do is we build IKEA apartments or IKEA houses, really. And there are some really nice things
Containers.
at IKEA, but like we build like the cheap IKEA stuff, right? I think containers are a good example of that. I think Kubernetes is a good example of that, right? Like we're like, it's like we're gonna have an IKEA home. It's like we're gonna have a Kubernetes system, and it's like, what does that mean? And I think at least most of the places I've been, it means you just start like pulling pieces off the shelf as you realize that you need them, and you haven't like thought everything through, but there's like so many different pieces that you could put together that you wind up like trying to get the best localized decision, but they don't all fit together. Like the best maybe the best container orchestrator or container runtime doesn't fit well with the best like service mesh or whatever. So you wind up with like all of these pieces that like sort of fit together but don't really fit together. And then eventually, you know, we all decide that like, well, IKEA, this brand, like this line of IKEA isn't cool anymore, so we're gonna toss it out and bring in a whole new line. That's like we just recycle all of the furniture in our apartment, but like we didn't really solve the underlying problem, right? I feel like that's a thing of balance. I think that's something we should definitely explore here, of just like we do have this cycle in software engineering where we go from like, oh, we're just going to put a bunch of stuff together, get stuff off the shelf because we need to go fast, right? Whether you're a startup or it's a new project, you don't have a lot of timeline or don't have a lot of time or don't have a lot of resources. We just pull a bunch of stuff off, patch it all together. We're like, good, we're moving. And then it works. And then over time, it kind of, it just becomes brittle and it crumbles and everybody hates maintaining it. It's like IKEA furniture that you've taken apart and put together again like 100 times. And it's like, this stuff doesn't fit anymore. And we're like, okay, we'll throw it all away. And then we're going to try again. We're going to try fresh and new. But
fast again.
Yeah, but it's fast again, right? It's like fresh and new, but at the same pace we were moving before. And I feel like
at the same velocity.
We don't want to lose any velocity. You need to keep moving. You need to keep building. We're going to build a whole new platform, a whole new set of microservices or whatever. And I feel like we blame the furniture for being bad, right? It's like we blame Kubernetes for being bad. We blame REST APIs or JSON or container or whatever. And it's like we bring in the new hotness and it's like, microservices will fix this, or gRPC will fix this, or whatever. It's like, yeah, that lamp wasn't like, it didn't fit with the decor because it's like a bad lamp. It's because like you didn't buy a lamp that fit with the rest of the stuff. Like you got to buy things that fit together.
Yeah.
Man, my statements are not ending in questions lately.
They're so wholesome, true that you yourself nodding. Absolutely.
Yeah, I feel like this is like Kris just like talks to the world with like Ian and Natalie bringing up really good points.
Well, if anybody is listening and is going to build IKEA software, hi, we're happy to inspire you.
Yes.
Please make it reverse compatible. I have an very old kitchen in this apartment, and it doesn't fit the new doors. So please make it reverse compatible more.
I do feel though that, you know, speaking of this kind of like, because I think what we're getting here is some sort of like, we need a better balance of how we build software, right? It's like, we're stuck in this loop. It feels like we got really inspired by iteration, and so we iterate a lot, but it kind of feels like we're iterating on the wrong things. Like we're iterating on the concepts of how we build software, but not the fundamental problems of the software itself. And I feel like one of the things that we tend to iterate toward or kind of default to, at least we did so heavily in pre-pandemic times, maybe it's shifting a little bit now, but it feels like every time there's a problem, we kind of strike up a meeting. We're like, yes, let's have a meeting. Let's put a reoccurring meeting on the schedule. And like that will solve the problems that we're having. We'll get together and we'll have meetings. So my first question is, do either of you find meetings to be productive?
I would say maybe 1 in 10. 1 in 10 meetings is productive.
Can you predict, Ian, how if a meeting is going to be productive or not?
Oh, definitely. Is there more than 3 people in it? Then no, it's not productive. Like it's a good rule, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I I think if a meeting, the intention is to solve a problem when you go into a meeting and not discuss what the problem is, it's probably not going to be productive. Like we shouldn't ideate, like we shouldn't form solutions in meetings. We should figure out the problems, go solve them, and then like sync back up and be like, hey, is this a good solution? Not like everyone's sitting around a table, like trying to solve something. I don't think is the best use of time.
It's a very good point. I think also meetings that don't have an agenda or something prep doc is also likely to be productive, but it's a good indicator.
Yeah, it's I feel like that's one of the hard balancing things is like we all know that good meetings, or I guess many of us know that good meetings require agendas, but we get a lot of those invites that just never have an agenda, and they never have like the what are we actually going to do in these meetings.
That's actually one of the rules we have. If there's more than 3 people in the meeting, it does need an agenda.
That's a great one.
That's a very good rule. I like that. That's a good way to balance the meetings in your schedule. All right, so I think we can kind of agree. Like it seems like there's a way to balance meetings here, right? It's like I feel like our short conversation has kind of brought us to this conclusion of meetings not necessarily bad. They can be productive, but they need to have structure to them. They need to have an agenda. They need to have a purpose. Because there are meetings where you have a really nice agenda, but also it's like, what are we actually like? What conclusion are we trying to reach? Like sometimes it can be hard just to get to that point as well. But I think another area of balancing work and trying to keep things in order is the backlog, right? Is this giant list of things that we have. And I know I've definitely felt in the past that like backlogs either become, giant dumping grounds for tasks that we want to do. And they often feel pretty endless. It feels like, oh, there's so many things on there that I want to do. And it feels like we're moving through it so slowly. And I wonder if either of you have some maybe suggestions for our audience or some techniques you use to help make the backlog that you guys use feel less daunting.
One thing that works actually as a community organizer, so not related to code, is that we have a Trello board per year. And we can carry over meetup ID, which is what in our backlog column, but you have to kind of proactively opt in. You want to do this. It's not kind of like if you have some board that is not necessarily per year, but per project, this can stay in the backlog forever. But if you give it a lifetime of maximum 1 year or kind of like the end of the calendar year, you do reevaluate this better and it's more generally acceptable to kill things in the backlog that, well, it's a good idea. It's not going to happen. We don't take this to the new year.
Something that we do is, I think it's called ICE scoring, like impact. What is the C? Confidence and ease. So you score them like 1 to 10, and the compound score is the addition of all of those. And then we just kind of drop everything at the bottom of the list. We archive that and we don't ever look at it again. We've decided it's not a big deal. And if that stuff changes, it's going to rise back up in that list. There's so many of those like prioritization things that exist that probably do work well. And I'm fine with a backlog just being huge. It's not supposed to be organized. It's a backlog. It's where I want to put something that I don't want. Like if I leave, I want someone else to be able to read about it. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to do it.
It's also a place that if you have somebody else who joins the company or the team and says, you should do that. Look, it lives in a backlog for 3.5 years.
Yeah, it's a great idea, but look how hard it is to implement. We're not going to do it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, otherwise, you rehash things. Like, yeah, I agree.
Right. Yeah, I like that use of a backlog. Like the nice rule in place where it's like check the backlog before you add something new to make sure it doesn't already exist there. This is the other thing I've found with backlog sometimes is that we do pile in things. It's like, why are there 5 of the same feature request or the same thing in here? All right. So we've talked a bit about, balancing work. Hopefully we've given our audience some nice tips around that. Let's talk about balancing things outside of work. And I want to start with community. Many, or I think probably all of our listeners are part of the Go community. So we're all involved in a community. And Natalie, you help organize both a conference and meetups. So I'm wondering for you, do you wind up having to like track the time that you spend in the community space in the same ways that you kind of would track your full-time work?
I will make a small correction that I'm not helping organizing. I've been the main organizer for the years, and it's been a long 5 years in the Go meetup, and I'm still very much enjoying that. And with the Go conference, I'm not tracking my time well. I have a reason to do that, I guess. It's a blocker in the calendar in that sense, so I know not to plan that, and I know roughly how much it takes. But I think it's all, at least the Go meetup, it's structured that to be the same form time, and then there were 2 years, and now we're in each one a month. And on months when I have a good log of speakers, and I'll second to say that we need speakers to talk. If it's in another, we're happy to hear it. It's online, you still want to hear that. Jumping back, I know that I will have to do the same few steps as I've been doing for the past few years, every few months. And I guess because it's so automated, it's also no longer needed really to be tracking. But maybe whenever inviting a new organizer on board, be slightly more the COVID days when I relocate more. I had a number on this, but asking if anybody wants to me, because I would how many hours commit to. But now the same co-organizers are with me for 2 years now, so I think I forgot how long it takes. Yeah, I would track that if there would be monetary things, as I would track my job, yes. But because this is community work, I guess saying that like an evening a month for joining the meetup, and then a few more hours here and there like emails. No.
Yeah, no, I think that's that makes sense. I know for me personally, I don't think I've ever tracked my own hours for community work, but I have noticed that I do self-regulate a lot. So if I'm like involved in too many things, 'cause I've organized several conferences and meetups in my past, even going back to like my days of Drupal. Actually, hilarious side note, I'm still part of the Drupal community in New York City. Like I think it's like 10 years later at this point. And yeah, I think it's like I kind of like pull back and then go back in when I like, if I feel like I'm burning out a little bit, I kind of pull back and then kind of swaps in. And I think that's an interesting thing that happens in communities that I've found, is that like the organizers, the people that keep everything going, they do tend to change over time. I think it's amazing that you've been an organizer for 5 years, Natalie. I know like how much effort you've gotten it down to be like a few hours a month plus the night, but that's a long journey for sure. And I've seen a lot of organizing groups kind of cycle in and cycle out. But I wonder too.
It's a German efficiency.
Yes, you've gotten your velocity to a very, very high degree, so you can just knock out all of those tasks you have to do.
The German pipeline.
Yes. Yeah. It's that German efficiency that we've got going. And I wonder, and maybe you kind of already answered this, but do you find yourself setting boundaries around things, or are they really just built into the way that you've set things up? Like, do you ever get close to experiencing burnout when it comes to your organizing or anything like that?
Definitely, yeah. Occasionally when that feeling comes, it's in the form of I don't want to do this anymore, and then I would probably ask one of my co-organizers to step in and just switch months. So that's the good thing about having the option of switch. And I think it also comes a little like big holidays for me. If it's a Christmas slowdown, then I and it's a bit to like, let's make sure that December meetup is very early in the year, and the January is very early in the month. It's very late in the month, so there'll be like a bigger gap. But it also makes sense because so many people have travel plans. To make another analogy, it's a little bit like budgeting. You know, some people budget in the sense that they know to the resolution of like pennies, cents, how they spend their money and where it goes. And I find that for me, putting a cutoff and saying all the expenses under, I don't know, $50, I would not really keep track, and I'm okay with that because I know where the 80% of my money is spent and the rest is here and there. I think managing spending and using the time in a similar way is the way that works for me. But organizing meetups is one way of doing community work. Open source is another way of doing community work.
Right. Yeah.
Ian, do you budget your open source time?
You know, I'm much more of a consumer of open source right now than a major contributor, but I kind of tend to treat all of the like open source stuff and general work stuff as like kind of one big block. So that kind of comes in when there's slower times with like my real job. I tend to work on like open source stuff like that. I think mainly because I only have so many hours a day in me that I feel like I can sit down and think about tech stuff, think about code. So yeah, I don't know if it's the healthiest way to budget that, but I tend to just lump those together.
Yeah, I would say for me, I don't do as much. I think the main open source contribution I've done has been part of work, so it's always been lumped together. So I think especially when it comes to code, open source, like, you know, the most open source code I've written was for a job that I had. So I never had it be like a separate thing. But from community work, I've definitely gotten the sense of burnout before. I've definitely been in that place where it's just like, I'm going to take a step back. But I think what it often turns into is like, I want to do something slightly different from what I was doing before. So like a good example of that for me is with the Drupal stuff that I've been doing. Originally, I was like one of the main people organizing the meetup, and then I became like the AV person. So I'd take care of like recording all of the meetups and then getting them up to YouTube and all of that. And then I also became the person that would like take care of all of the like food and beverages to make sure we have pizza and beer and all of that at the meetup. And then for a while I had like the venue. So it was like, oh, I'll like make sure we can, you know, have the space every month. So it's like, I always like trade off roles whenever I feel like one of the roles I'm in is like getting too exhausting or getting too boring for me. So I think that's always a sign of like burnout. So yeah, I think that's like another way that you can kind of like help balance your life when it comes to community involvement and community work. And I think that applies to open source as well. Like I can imagine a good scenario where you could, you know, maybe you start with contributing to code, but then, you know, you don't have much time to do code. So maybe you do code reviews, or maybe you just do documentation. Although I kind of feel like it's the other way around, because like documentation and code reviews take way more energy than writing code most of the time. But whatever it is you kind of trade off, I think that can also be a good way to like keep yourself away from burnout for you know, any of the kind of community stuff you might wind up doing.
Use the writing documentation. Oktoberfest is now. Any of you signed up?
I have not.
Have you signed up to in the past?
I feel like I haven't heard of it before.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat here. I've never heard of Oktoberfest.
Accent or
No, it's
okay, just making sure. It's GitHub and some other companies like DigitalOcean, and some of them change over the years. But if you make this many open contributions, so code, it can be documentation. The rules change a little bit every year. Then they send you a swag packet, like stickers and T-shirts and so on, and then it's all to wear that interview because they're like, oh, you're doing open source. Nice.
Huh. I like that.
So you have to do those. I think it's 3. I forget. You have those contributions then the month over, and there's some rules that you cannot, make up repos and yourself. It's not cheats like actually something good, whatever level. And it can also be contributing like typos and so on, really any level that works for you. But it has to be helping promote open source. I think it's a wonderful initiative, and it's the small things that kind of, because you get that t-shirt, you get that care package, it's really, it's fun. It makes you enjoy Oktoberfest more, or open source more.
Yeah, no, I think that's really cool. I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah,
who
same.
doesn't want more swag? Especially with the fewer in-person conferences, I feel like my amount of swag has just like been so low these past few years.
I have to say, the Oktoberfest t-shirts every year, they're so soft. That's like the wonderful shirts that you get, and like, there's always that one vendor that everybody likes their shirt. It's this one. You want their shirts.
Oh yeah, that's the other thing I remember at conferences is those high quality t-shirts. It's like, I'm gonna remember your company forever now because you have that one really nice conference shirt that I can wear forever.
Yes. And in the last years, many of them have been through tests that we wear house clothing way more often and don't get to refresh that much.
Yeah. Well, hopefully in-person conferences will make a return next year and we'll be able to gather together again. All right. Well, let's move on to another topic about balancing our lives, and let's talk about actually balancing our life. We talk about work-life balance. Well, there's a life component there. And it feels like even though we have, so much to do at work, sometimes it feels like we have even more to do in our personal lives, depending on, what your actual personal life is, whether that's kids or extracurriculars you're doing or hobbies that you have. Even those hobbies are things like, open source or community. So I would ask my two panelists here, what do you do in your life to prevent feeling overwhelmed by like what's happening and all of the things that you have going on? Natalie, why don't you start?
Well, I can tell you what Ian is doing. I think Ian loves walking his dog. Yeah. I really enjoy spending time with my cat. I include her in most of my social media. So probably most of my Instagram stories is her. A good amount of my Twitter pictures is her. I used to really, there's a puppy. Hello. I get easily distracted by pets. What is the name of your pet, Ian?
His name's Rocky.
Hello, Rocky. Is he a champ?
Is he a what?
A champ.
He is. He is not happy right now.
No.
Our doorbell rang and he does not like that. All right, so where were we?
I think Natalie was explaining how she involves her cat in everything.
I try to spend a lot of my professional time with her. I feel like cats and coding is a good combination. I do enjoy being outside a lot. I used to work on my sailing license. I did make a pause, and I do hope to continue. I really hope to have made it to the next level this summer. This did not happen, so maybe I'll use the winter slowdown for that. That probably sports, because it's always good for you. Yeah. And well, somehow I'm one of those people that doing meetups is really energizing them. Okay. Or even start the evening and then 15 things went wrong, and then it's the end of the night. I'm like, whoo, that was fun. So in online, it's not the same, I have to say.
I totally agree with that. The in-person meetups are something that, like, I feel like I'm still making progress in like work and career, but it's just so enjoyable that it does feel like a nice balance.
And just being able to go out and get like a drink with a friend afterward as well. That's always it's nice. But yeah, I definitely feel you there, Natalie, with the whole like, yeah, I mean, you've had this big event and it's over and you're just sitting there and you're just like, ooh, there was a lot, but it felt amazing.
Yes.
The energy you draw from that can be absolutely wonderful. So Ian, what do you do when you start feeling overwhelmed with life, or to prevent yourself from feeling overwhelmed with everything going on in life?
Yeah, for me, a big one there is exercise. Like I climb pretty regularly and try to do that more when I'm kind of feeling burnt out or have a lot going on. It's amazing. You can spend like an hour a day exercising, and it feels like it gives you back like 3 hours in your day of focus and not feeling drained. And yeah, that's kind of about it. I'm a pretty simple guy.
Nice.
I think that going outside, leaving the house is different for people who live in a house versus people who live in a flat. I live in a classic like old German building with very high ceilings, and I live in the last floor, and we have no elevators. Going outside is like from the moment that I touch the door handle until I'm breathing outside air, and I have to go through the like, yard between the buildings and then to the second building. So this is like solid 6 minutes. So living that like a big engagement. And I imagine if I would live in a house or even in the ground floor of a building, it would be like a lot more of an easier thing to go outside and grab some sun, like especially as the winter is coming and the days are shorter than the side. It's a good question to bring up, because like you should be more mindful of that, especially if you live further from the equator and you're getting more dark hours.
Yeah, I definitely try over the past year. Like I think it was in like December of last year, I was like, I'm not working out. I'm not doing enough to like keep myself physically healthy. So I started just like jump roping. And then when the spring rolled around, I started running again. And I just remember how different it felt from like, you know, in the middle of last year, I was just like inside for days and days and days at a time. I'd like order my groceries, order my food. Cause I'm like, I'm in New York City. There's a pandemic. I don't want to go outside. Like it's absolutely terrifying outside. And I don't think I realized how much that did wear on me until like I did start getting outside again and running and just like having the fresh air and all of that. But likewise, I live more vertically high in the air. So there is like an elevator ride that is somewhat quick, but it is like this experience of like exiting my home, which is not the same as when you live in a house and you just kind of like open the door and then boom, you're outside. It's like, now I gotta like actually get in an elevator and then have my ears pop and all this other stuff that happens as you're going down. It's like a transition. But the other thing that I do to try and not feel overwhelmed is I tend to write a lot. Like I do a lot of journaling. What some might consider a ridiculous amount of journaling, but it's that thing that like keeps me centered at the end of the day. Like I think now I'm up to writing about 5,000 words per day of just like journaling and just getting everything out of my head. So I think like if writing is your thing, dedicating yourself to actually journaling every day is a really good way to kind of prevent yourself from feeling overwhelmed. So, you know, we aren't always great at keeping ourselves from being overwhelmed. And, you know, when you experience a lot of being overwhelmed over the same period of time, we tend to burn out. So first I want to ask, you know, if you have felt overwhelmed in the past a lot and gotten close to burnout or gotten close to burnout and caught yourself, how have you like avoided falling all the way into burnout? How have you kind of like reverse the trend that happens there?
Yeah, so I'm feeling that way a couple of times, like in the last couple of years. And I think when I am starting to feel burnout and like overwhelmed, I used to have this habit of kind of shutting down and not communicating. And, you know, like, you know, a project's not going well, you know, it kind of get this landslide of it's not going well. So then I feel bad. So I'm not as productive. So it goes down. And I think the biggest way to get out of that is just communication. Communicate with your team, communicate with your manager, everyone, and just if everyone knows where you're at and everyone's okay, like that pressure just kind of goes away. And I think that really helps alleviate some of that burnout. Obviously it doesn't do everything for it, but it just does help it from escalating.
It also makes things more manageable. Like it's not as scary that like oh no, they know they know that all this time it was one thing, but this is what now and no more, and I will not do that work and so on. So definitely, like for instance, there's a sunlight is disinfecting. Yeah. It makes sense it sounds better in other languages, but it makes sense even in English. The sense of communicating that makes things kind of more into proportion and stops that from being a snowball. Yeah. I definitely agree that telling to the team that there will be a slowdown coming up. Velocity is not going to be the same. Those are good professional ways, or good ways of handling that in your professional life.
Oh yeah, I like those. So have you ever gotten to the point where you are just like actually fully burned out? You know, like it's exhausting to get out of bed every morning. You're just like, I just don't want to. Can I just not? When that happens, how have you, if that has happened to you, how have you actually kind of pulled yourself out of that situation?
So I used to work for a company that has or had unlimited vacation day policy. And that, of course, translated to me taking like maybe 2 Monday, Friday to bridge for a little bit of a long weekend. But then it came, I think September, or it's like close to my birthday, which is end of August. And I realized that I have not been on vacation for probably a year, probably more. I took a week off on my birthday, and it was terrible because I didn't make any travel plans. I didn't do anything specific. So I was just sitting at home. Because my brain was used to be working so much, but it had no new tasks. I just filled it up with all sorts of ideas. And that week I came out of it with like a list of 50 half started, half done projects. And just putting it in the back versus saying, I'm not going to do it. Also, a mental toll for me, saying, oh, I'm not going to do that. Probably I learned how to say no well from that week. And what I would do today is catch it earlier and take some time off, maybe not a week, maybe a few days, and see if I need more. And I'm really enjoying binging books in Audible, so ebooks or audiobooks. Just in something completely different, not stories, but sort of like skills or something like a discovery interesting that somebody made, something like that. It's kind of the focus, but it remains productive. So channeling that energy somewhere else.
I kind of think you hit the nail on the head when you said catch it earlier. I do think like it's obviously best to catch it before you get to the point where it's hard to get out of bed in the morning. And something interesting I've seen recently is like mandatory vacation. I've seen like a couple companies talking about that, both to prevent this burnout and to just better tech. You know, if you're not there, everything should still function. The company I currently work for does something kind of like this. We have one Friday a month where everyone's off. So it's kind of one of these recharge days, and it seems kind of silly, but having everyone off at the same time really does take the pressure off. Like it's not vacation at this point, you know, it's no one's working, I'm not holding anyone up. And that's especially during these like hard times, that's went a long way.
In Norway, there's a thing that if you don't take your vacation days for the year, your employer gets.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, people have their vacations. You're going to have a really good reason not to do that. And like nobody will want to have all of those.
Yeah,
I think this is a big mental difference generally between Europe and the US. How many vacation days you have. So German minimum full-time job, it's 20 days. You can carry over to the next year. Different companies have numbers, but usually 10, and you have the following year. This tweet that goes around that says like compare the German, the European and the American mentality of I'm going to be out of the office between 5 and 7 p.m. because I'm undergoing a surgery, but I'll respond to your email as soon as possible, versus I'm out on the lake fishing and I'll talk to you in a month only if you follow up with your email because I'm going to delete all of them the day I'm back. And this is a big difference. And of course, it's exaggerating, but I think this is a very interesting concept to say that if your email is, this is when bump, like it's on you to bump it. It's necessarily on me to go through 3,000 emails because I went on a really long vacation.
Yeah, and I think I think Ian, you kind of brought up this other perspective of it, where it can be actually beneficial for the company as well to make sure people are taking their vacation time. I know that at least in the US, and I imagine other places as well, in the financial industry, certain positions have mandatory contiguous 2-week vacation times every year. And that's to ensure that, like it takes about 2 weeks for a financial scheme to fall apart. So that's to make sure that like fraud isn't happening. But I think the same sort of thing can apply for us in software, just like making sure that there's not like a single person that's keeping this one system running, because like they always wake up when it's falling over. And if that person like got sick or if they left, now there's like that whole system would break. So I think, yeah, having days or weeks where it's just like, yeah, nobody's here, or like people, like everybody has to take this like big long time off just to make sure that we have that organizational resiliency to actually, survive someone being gone for a period of time. It's definitely in the best interest of the company as a whole. So it's good for the worker, good for the person. It's a win-win. Vacation.
That's a really good point. It's true. That's the way to find single points of failure.
Yeah, because it comes up in conversations all the time of like this, whether you call it the bus factor or just like the sick factor or the I won the lottery factor. It's like, what happens when like these people disappear from the company? It's like, well, you can artificially make that happen with the benefit of them coming back after it's done, so you don't actually lose them. It's one of those like risk planning things. And it also kind of forces you to see how much you're depending on individual people, right? Because if you're like, my God, I can't be like have that one person gone for 2 weeks because like things won't get done, we'll fall behind in all of our schedules. Well, that's also a gigantic risk that you should probably be mitigating and figuring out.
100%.
All right. So, we've talked a lot about code in general. We haven't really talked about Go specifically. So I want to have like a little part at the end here to ask you if there are ways in which you see Go either helping or hindering a kind of balanced development style or like a balanced development experience for software engineers.
Can we to what you mean by balanced here? Just would love to get a sense of that.
See, you're making me have to define what I mean. So I guess from balance of like any of the things that we've talked about, right? Like, does it help balance the software we write at the end of the day? Does it help balance, are there things about it that make it, a good language for people to contribute to? Are there things that make it a hard language to contribute to? And then like, just in like the personal life of engineers, like are there things about Go that make it like, make it so that engineers like, can take vacation and feel good about it? Or the things that are like, oh no, like because we develop in this style, because we develop this language, it's harder for people to do those things. Just curious if there's any linkages you see for that into Go itself, and maybe improvements we could make as a community or within the language to help, resolve those things that more hinder people's ability to balance.
I feel like the simplicity of Go comes up in kind of every conversation, but I think it belongs here as well. Because, I mean, the readability of Go does make it so like when you're gone for 2 weeks, and something goes down, someone can read through your code and figure out what it is. Like I do think the barrier to entry and code you didn't write in Go is lower than a lot of other languages.
And also a lot of the mentality that is related to Go, like doing things TDD, like all the unit test plus integration benchmarking, can kind of frame things like you feel you have more tools to feel confident and comfortable in knowing what to expect and assume things with slightly more confidence. Also with an easier way, right? Because things like benchmarking, for example, is built in.
Yeah, the fact that there's one library for doing unit tests, where if something's going wrong, I can very easily go in and create a unit test that fails for it and try to find a fix. I do think that helps, specifically in like those everything has gone wrong and I need to fix it right now things.
Also, Go gave us, or the creation of Go, followed by creating a lot of tools that were written in Go that help maintenance or even understanding what things are wrong, making it all easier, whether it's orchestration, whether it's all the different monitoring tools that were written in Go and so on. So that also definitely helped. I feel that also the Go community is somewhat bringing the more relaxed mentality into work. So kind of because this is a friendly and mindful community, most Go developers take this back to their team and so make the tech team kind of more not so stressful. And of course you have to meet the velocity and you have to do and deliver and so on, but it also still friendly enough, and this comes up in conversations and in understanding when things go wrong.
I would also add, I think it's less so now, I think, but in the early days of Go, the kind of combination of a standard library that had like usable packages with an awful dependency management solution made it so that we didn't have a lot of dependencies in our Go code. And I feel like that helps with the overall maintainability. Like, yeah, you have to like write some code that you might have not had to write in another language, or copy some code from somewhere you might not have had to do in another language because you could have just grabbed a dependency. But it feels like the long-term effects of having fewer dependencies is that like fewer things are there to break, because there's fewer things that like, oh, this dependency got updated and now like broke all of the stuff I had, or like there's a security flaw that now I have to like go and dig in and figure out if it affects my code or whatnot. I feel like that low number of dependencies that we have definitely is a boon to Go, at least has been historically.
And if you're a DevOps person, you know, you can always cross compile very easily.
Yeah.
Also nice.
You can actually assemble container images on your Mac locally without having to run a Linux VM, which is cool. All right. Well, I think it's time for some unpopular opinions. So let me play this little intro here.
Unpopular opinion. I actually think you should probably leave. Unpopular opinion.
All right, Natalie, do you have an unpopular opinion?
I have an unpopular opinion fresh from today.
Oh,
today exciting. I gave a talk about how to give technical talks. And one of the slides my recommendation to more memes, less text. And then I had some more slides, and then we had the breakout room, and then I was not participating because it was for the attendees, and then we came back all together to the call, and then all the attendees were saying like conclusions, kind of discussing this in the breakout rooms, and most of the breakout rooms say that memes are not necessarily a good idea. It can be not inclusive to people who don't know a specific meme. It can get offensive. It can, especially if you change it from, you know, using a meme generator to make it relevant for whatever technical topic you're focusing on. This can also not work. So a lot of people were against this idea, and this became my unpopular idea or unpopular opinion. Use more memes and slides.
I like your unpopular opinion. Like I don't know if I would say, I don't know if the meme part, maybe the meme part's what makes it unpopular here, but I just like, I want more like just random nonsense for me to look at on the slide while I listen to what you're saying. Like I don't like it when people put a lot of text on the slide and then read that text, because I'm just going to read it and then I'm not really listening to them. And it just makes it more difficult to like comprehend and understand what is going on. It's kind of like an audiobook. It's like I need something to look at or something to do, like folding the laundry while I'm listening to this and like processing what you're saying. And if I'm doing something that distracts me, it makes it harder to actually like understand. So like either like a nice image or something that just kind of like helps me understand what you're saying is good. Text on a slide, not great. And I think that's where memes can be like really, really helpful. But I understand people's concerns, but also like, well,
Yeah.
And if you don't know the meme, trying to figure out how it relates, I do think is engaging. Even like just tangentially related pictures where you're like looking like, why is there a picture of a penguin on the screen and you're talking about this thing? You know, like I do think it's engaging. So I think I would agree with that one as well.
Maybe it's a know your audience thing, like know if they're gonna understand the meme. But yeah, I mean, memes are just part of daily life now. It's just one of those things. We're just like, yeah.
It's also you need to strike a balance between like not too outdated memes so that people will like, oh yeah, that's funny 2 years ago, but also not something that most people don't know.
Yeah. The world we live in. Memes. I bet there's a lot of memes to express that sentiment as well. All right. Ian, do you have an unpopular opinion?
I think so. I don't know if this one's come up before, but and this is kind of just a negative thing, but I don't like make. I see make files everywhere, you know, just for like building things and running things, and I have never liked make. I just think it makes things more complicated. I have to have Ruby installed.
For make?
Isn't make Ruby? Yeah.
Make isn't Ruby. Make is, I don't know what it is, but it's old.
It is very old, but
because there's that distinction between tabs and spaces in make, and yeah, I think the guy that created make was like, I'm sorry, at some point for I think it was specifically the tabs and spaces problem with make files. Yeah, make is.
I see a lot of make files that literally have one command in them. It's like make build, and it just runs a go build. You know, like
that I can. Yeah, when I see a make file that just like has one-liners that are all of the go commands, I kind of question like why. Why not write a shell script? Why not write a Go program that runs your thing? Like get all meta.
Shout out to Mage if anyone's seen that, the Go version of make. I actually wouldn't recommend using it most of the time, but
so
this will be in the show notes.
Do you specifically not like make, or do you also not like all of the variants of make?
No, I don't like the variants either. Like just write
Okay.
a shell script, you know, I just have a folder of shell scripts, and how is that any harder than
it can be less confusing. I know there's all sorts of things I've tripped over in make before, like the way that sub cells work. That always trips me up of like what gets passed in versus what doesn't. It's yeah, I don't know if that's gonna that might be that might be a 50-50 split. There might be some people that find it like, no, I love make, and then there's probably a bunch of people that are like, burn it to the ground.
And it could be I just haven't taken the time to really dig in and understand everything, but I just don't know if I want to do that.
That's fair.
Fair. All right, so I at the end of the day, I don't know if either of these would be popular or unpopular, but we're going to put them on Twitter, and we're going to see what our wonderful listeners have to say. Maybe
Kris, what is your most popular unpopular opinion? Do you remember?
What's my most popular unpopular? So like the one that got the most like people said that it was unpopular.
That's very meta. Let's say yes.
Okay. I think because I think I had two that were tied as like the most unpopular opinions. And I think the one that I remember was the one where I said that saying Golang or calling it Golang and not Go is a respect problem for our community. That one really got some feedback. The people felt very strongly about that one. So I think that was my most unpopular opinion. Yeah, I had another one that was also very unpopular, but I don't remember what it was.
I disagree with the Golang one.
I mean, I'd fine with like you using it in context. Like, I don't know, like if you need hashtag Golang, whatever, or type into Google, whatever, but like don't put on a book cover. Not that.
Okay, yeah, don't put it on it. Yeah, you're right. You're right there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. People disagreed with me, but that's the point of unpopular opinions, is they're supposed to be unpopular. So
That's how you win. This one.
yeah, it's winning a game that it's like the worst game to win because it means that he says something unpopular. All right, so I think that about does it for us in this episode on balancing work and life. I want to thank you, Ian, for joining us today, and thank you, Natalie, for hopping on as my co-host.
It's been a
Thank
pleasure.
you, Chris. Thank you.
I do enjoy our music. Our music is top notch.
Matt is with us even when he's not here.
Yes, Matt is here. Especially
You know,
because-
we missed this episode. I just realized we missed a Thanos joke. All things perfectly balanced as they should be.
Delete half the code.
Yeah.
That is the solution to most problems. Just delete.
I think I saw somewhere like an open source project that is called Thanos that does exactly that. It randomly deletes 50% of your code.
I mean, you could probably in a lot of code bases delete like half of the test, and that would make up for half of the code in the. Or you could delete the test and make up for most of the code in the code base.
I would say most of our code bases are more test code than
Yeah.
real code.
Something that deletes randomly 50% of your backlog.
Oh, that
Ooh.
sounds like fun.
I like that one. Have you guys
Great.
seen the code? What's it called? Like GitHub's thing where it automatically writes code for you. Like you can stub out a
Codex.
function.
Yeah.
I bet there could be like a Thanos snap version of that where it looks at everything and then simplifies it down to.
Interesting.
It's just like, yeah, we're just gonna get rid of most of this. Goodbye, wipe it away. Just delete all of your tests. It's like, do you really need them?
The random documentation lines.
Or better yet, a tool that just goes around and like randomly changes small things within your code base, but keeps them compilable. Just like really big annoyances.
Ooh, that's mean.
Fuzz. The real fuzzing.
It reminds me of like I saw this TikTok once and it was like a guy and he was just like, if you really want to get back at someone, like do these things. And like one of them was like, go to someone who you don't like's house as like a party and take all of the remotes except one. Because then they'll be like, where are all the remotes? I have this one. So clearly like no one took them. It's just small things that inconvenience people's lives. I'm like, yes.
Put dead batteries in all the remotes.
Or that. It's like, why are none of my remotes working? Just like little inconveniences in people's lives. Yeah, don't do that. That's a way to unbalance other people's lives. And this episode was about balancing people's lives.
Exactly.
Although I guess you could balance your life by unbalancing someone else's life. But no, that's negative. Don't do that.
Balance it to the positive. Yes.
Positive balance. But if you want to write a bot that people can run on their own code bases that puts small annoyances into their code.
That's just a community contribution, right? Like
yeah, and that could be a tool, like a pull request. You know, like make sure you're reviewing your code base. There's like slight difference, like actual bit rot, right?
Mm-hmm.
That could be a good name for it. Bit rot. Did you run the bit rot bot? This episode is wild. All right.
Gave all the people all the ideas. So good job, us.
Yes, and I'm going to take us off YouTube. So